Some debts come with a price far greater than money. I learned that the hard way, on a night I'll never forget. It started with a knock. Just a knock. Soft at first, almost polite. But when I didn't answer right away, it came again. Louder, harder, more demanding. My stomach sank. I knew who it was. I was late on rent. Again. And I thought that was the worst of my problems. But I had no idea that when I opened that door, my whole world was about to change. Because my landlord didn't come alone. Stay with me until the end. You won't believe what happened next. I stood there, frozen. My fingers hovered over the lock, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. I thought I had more time. He said he understood. But when I opened that door, I realized he had other plans. It had been a long month. A long, exhausting, soul-crushing month. You know the kind, where every single day feels like you're sinking deeper into quicksand. I was behind on rent, barely keeping up with bills. Every dollar I made at my 2 dead-end jobs went straight to survival, cheap groceries, gas, keeping the lights on just long enough to avoid a shut-off notice. And rent? Well, rent had become a conversation I hated having. The place wasn't much. A tiny, run-down apartment with peeling wallpaper and a fridge that hummed louder than my own thoughts at night. The kind of place where the pipes rattled when you turn the sink on too fast. The kind of place you end up in when life knocks you down and you don't have the strength to get back up. But it was mine. Or at least, it had been. Until tonight. My landlord, he was always friendly. Too friendly. His name was Mark. Early 40s. Average-looking guy. Nothing that would make you think twice if you passed him on the street. But there was something about him, something in the way he lingered a little too long when he spoke to me. The way his eyes always seemed to trail lower than they should. The way his smiles felt just a little too warm, like he was waiting for me to catch on to something. At first, I ignored it. Brushed it off. He was always polite. Always helpful. When I struggled with rent, he didn't pressure me like other landlords would. Didn't slap me with late fees or eviction threats. Instead, he would say things like, "Don't worry about it too much. We'll figure something out." I should have known. I should have known that when a man says, "We'll figure something out," it never just means money. I was exhausted that night. I had just gotten home from my second shift, legs aching, arms sore, the kind of tired that made you feel hollow inside. I dropped my keys on the counter and collapsed onto the couch, already dreading the next day. Then I saw it. The slip of paper taped to my door. Final notice. My stomach flipped. I ripped it off, scanning the words even though I already knew what it said. My grace period was up. If I didn't have the full amount by the end of the week, I was out. Panic settled in. I had nowhere to go. No family that would take me in. No friends who weren't barely scraping by themselves. This apartment was all I had, and now even that was slipping through my fingers. I grabbed my phone and hesitated before dialing. I didn't want to call him. I didn't want to hear his voice, feel that strange weight in his tone. But I had no choice. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Hey there." That voice. Friendly, smooth, like he was talking to an old friend. Not like a landlord about to throw a tenant onto the street. "Mark." I got the notice. Can I have a little more time? Please? I just need another week. There was a pause. Then a slow exhale, like he was pretending to think about it. "You know, I've been real patient with you, haven't I?" I swallowed hard. "I know. I promise. I'll tell you what," he cut me off. "Why don't we talk about this in person? I'll stop by later tonight. Maybe we can work something out." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I hesitated. I didn't want him here. But what could I say? What choice did I have? "Okay, good girl. I'll see you soon." Click. I stared at the phone in my hand, my stomach twisting. Something felt off. But I told myself I was just being paranoid. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that Mark was just a nice guy. But when the knock came again, harder this time, I knew. I knew I had just made a terrible mistake. The knock came again. Louder. I sucked in a shaky breath. My hands were clammy, my throat tight. I wiped my palms on my jeans and forced myself to move toward the door. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe this was just a conversation. But my gut was screaming at me, telling me that whatever was about to happen wasn't just about rent. I hesitated for a second longer, fingers resting on the cold metal of the doorknob. Another knock. Impatient this time. I swallowed hard and pulled the door open. And there he was. Mark stood on the other side, leaning against the doorframe like he owned the place. He had that same easy smile on his face, the one that made my skin crawl in ways I couldn't explain. But my eyes didn't stop at him. Because Mark hadn't come alone. Two men stood behind him. Strangers. They were older, late 40s, maybe early 50s. One was stocky, thick arms crossed over his chest. The other was thinner, tall, with sharp, calculating eyes that flicked over me like he was assessing something. Something inside me went ice cold. I didn't know them. I didn't know why they were here. But I knew. This wasn't just about rent. Mark's smile stretched wider. Hey there. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I could feel my pulse hammering against my ribs, feel the way my fingers twitched slightly at my sides. My body was reacting before my brain could even catch up. Every instinct, every nerve in my being was telling me to run. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because Mark was already stepping forward. I told you we'd figure something out, didn't I? He said, pushing past me into the apartment like he belonged there. The two men followed, slow and deliberate, shutting the door behind them. I forced a swallow, my throat dry. Who are they? Mark turned back to me, cocking his head like I had just asked the dumbest question in the world. Friends. The stocky one chuckled. The taller one just kept staring at me. My stomach churned. Mark sighed and walked further inside, brushing a hand over the kitchen counter like he was inspecting the place. You know, I've been real nice to you, he mused. Real patient. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but there was something behind it. Something heavy. You're a smart girl, he continued. I mean, you had to know this was coming, right? I blinked. What? What are you talking about? He'd scared. Come on. He turned to face me, smiling that same smile. I think you and I both know the way this works. My chest tightened. My skin prickled with heat and nausea. Because now? Now, I understood. The way he had always been so accommodating. The way he never threatened me with late fees, never pressured me about the money. The way he always said, we'll figure something out. This was what he had meant. I felt sick. Mark took a step toward me. Then another. I took a step back, my heels hitting the worn-out carpet. Relax, he said, his voice warm. I'm just saying we should help each other out. I shook my head. My hands were trembling. Mark, please, he cut me off with a chuckle, shaking his head like I was being ridiculous. Then he looked over at his two friends. What do you think, fellas? He asked them. Think she wants to make a deal? The taller one smirked. The stocky one just crossed his arms. A chill skated down my spine. I had to get out. Now, it wasn't the words, it was the way he said them. Like he already knew how this would end. My hands felt like ice. My skin, too tight over my bones. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Mark was still smiling, like this was just a friendly conversation, like I was being unreasonable for looking so scared. The stocky man cracked his knuckles. The taller one smirked. I should have seen this coming. I should have known. But what could I do? Who could I call? I didn't have anyone. No family to come rescue me. No boyfriend to show up and scare them off. I had friends, at least, I used to. But after my breakup, I had slowly pushed people away. It wasn't intentional. It just happened. You don't want to be the pity case, friend, the one always struggling, always needing help but never able to return the favor. Eventually, you stop answering texts, stop making plans. You tell yourself you'll figure things out on your own. Until one day, you wake up and realize you really are alone. I blinked rapidly, my throat tightening. No one was coming to help me. I was on my own. Mark took another step forward, and instinctively, I mirrored it in reverse, my back hitting the wall. Look, I forced out, my voice shaking. I just need a little more time. Please. His expression softened, mock sympathy. Sweetheart, I've already given you time. But time doesn't pay the bills. My stomach twisted. Then, lower, quieter, he added, but there are other ways you could settle this. The way he said it, like it was a favor, like it was something I should be grateful for, made my skin crawl. I wrapped my arms around myself. The reality of my situation hit like a punch to the gut. I had no money, no backup plan, no one to call, and these three men were standing between me and the only exit. I felt sick. My eyes darted to the bathroom mirror across the hall. I could see my reflection, pale, wide-eyed, small. I didn't look like the kind of woman who had control over her life. I looked exactly like what they thought I was. Vulnerable. Desperate. Breakable. I swallowed hard and tried to straighten my spine, tried to make myself look like I wasn't about to shatter. Because if they sensed weakness, if they knew I had no fight left in me, I was done for. I turned my back to them under the guise of thinking, stepping into the bathroom. I gripped the sink so hard my knuckles went white. I didn't even recognize the woman staring back at me. The cheap, oversized t-shirt I was wearing hung loosely over my frame, my collarbones sharp from skipping meals to stretch my grocery budget. My hair was a mess, dark strands clinging to the sweat on my forehead. I looked exhausted, worn down. And that's when it hit me. Maybe I had done this to myself. Maybe if I had been smarter, made better choices, I wouldn't be in this situation. If I hadn't quit college for a man who ended up cheating on me. If I had been better with money. If I had just swallowed my pride and asked for help before it was too late. Maybe I wouldn't be standing in this rundown apartment, staring at myself in the mirror, wondering how much worse things could get. I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to do this. I didn't even want to think about doing this. But what choice did I have? The way Mark had always looked at me. I wasn't stupid. I knew what he wanted. And now, standing here, trapped, knowing there was no one coming to save me. Would he really? I squeezed my arms tighter around myself, ball rising in my throat. No. He had always been nice, right? But then why did I feel like a rabbit caught in a trap? Why did I feel like a cornered animal, waiting for the predator to make his move? I sucked in a deep breath, forcing the panic down. Think. I reached out and locked the bathroom door. Not that it would help. Not really. Because my gut told me that lock wouldn't matter. Not if they had already decided. I gripped the edge of the sink, my breathing uneven. My fingers trembled against the cold porcelain. I needed to think. I needed a way out. But what options did I have? I was locked in a bathroom with nothing but a cheap mirror and a bottle of half-used soap. Three men were on the other side of that door, waiting. Watching. Mark's voice came again, smooth, almost teasing. Come on now, don't be rude. We're just here to talk. I swallowed hard. My skin prickled. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to do something, fight, run, anything. But I didn't move. I should have run. I should have screamed. But I froze. And that's when I knew I was in real trouble. The doorknob rattled. My stomach lurched. Mark sighed, the sound slow and deliberate. Now, don't make this difficult. A pause. Then a quiet, amused chuckle. You're not scared, are you? Something about the way he said it sent ice straight through my veins. Like he enjoyed this. Like he wanted me to be afraid. I sucked in a shaky breath and forced my voice to stay steady. I just need a second. Silence. Then, a whisper low, just outside the door. I couldn't make out the words, but the way it sent a shiver crawling down my spine told me it wasn't anything good. Then I heard it. A slow click. The sound of the front door locking. My pulse slammed into overdrive. The walls felt like they were closing in. I pressed my hands against the mirror, staring at my own reflection, trying to ground myself. But all I could see was a woman who had made too many mistakes. And now, she was trapped. Another knock. More forceful this time. Mark's voice was lower now, more direct. We're waiting. I bit my lip, my mind racing. Think. I had to get out of here. I glanced around, searching for anything, any possible way out. But there were no windows. No weapons. Nothing but the pale glow of the cheap bathroom light buzzing overhead. Another knock. "Don't keep us waiting, sweetheart." I squeezed my eyes shut. I could still hear my own voice, soft and small, just a few hours ago. Would he really? I had my answer now. Yes. He would. I needed to act. I forced my body to move, one shaky step, then another. I reached for the doorknob with damp, trembling fingers. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I turned it. The door creaked open, and there he was. Mark leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, his lips curled in something between amusement and impatience. The two men stood behind him, their eyes dark, unreadable. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. I don't understand what's going on." Mark tilted his head, like he was surprised I was still pretending. "Come on, now." He took a step forward, lowering his voice. "I've been good to you, haven't I?" I nodded, even though my stomach twisted violently. "And I haven't been pushy. I've given you time. I've given you options." Options. That word made me want to vomit. "Now," Mark continued, smiling like we were talking about something casual, "I just think it's time you and I finally worked something out." His voice was light, almost playful. But his eyes? His eyes were telling me there was no way out of this conversation. I felt myself take a step back. But Mark followed. My back hit the doorframe. His breath was warm against my face. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, too thick. My lungs felt heavy, my head light. The stocky man shifted, stepping closer. His presence alone made the space feel even smaller. The taller one, the quiet one, just watched. Waiting. For what, I didn't know. But I had a feeling I didn't want to find out. Mark reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His touch sent a cold shock through me. "See? Nothing to be scared of." I forced myself to stay still. To not recoil, even though every inch of my body wanted to. Because this was a game to them. And if I showed fear, I'd already lost. "You don't have to make this hard, you know." His fingers trailed lower, just barely grazing my jaw before pulling away. "We can help each other." I clenched my fists. "What do you say, sweetheart?" Silence. I could hear my own heartbeat, thudding painfully in my ears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I was trapped. Completely and utterly trapped. And the worst part? They knew it. Mark's smile didn't waver. If anything, it grew, stretching wider, curling at the corners like he already knew how this would play out. Like he had already won. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, voice dripping with something dark and knowing. "Don't make this difficult." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The stocky man shifted beside him, cracking his knuckles again, slow, deliberate, like he was getting ready for something. The taller one still hadn't spoken a word, but his eyes were locked on me, watching, waiting. Then a hand. On my wrist. A thick, strong hand clamped around me, fingers tightening, yanking me forward before I even had time to react. I gasped, my body jerking with the force of it. Marked Sked, shaking his head like I was a misbehaving child. "Don't act like you don't know how this works." I wrenched back, my heart hammering, but the grip didn't loosen. If anything, it tightened. No. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But it was. And my mind was racing, desperate, searching for a way out. A lie, a distraction, anything. But nothing came, because there was no way out. I was trapped. And then bang. The loudest sound of my life. The front door slammed open, crashing against the wall so hard I felt the floor shake. Everything froze. For a split second, no one moved. No one breathed. Then I saw him. A man stood in the doorway, shoulders squared, breath heavy, eyes darting around the room. A neighbor. Not someone I knew well, not someone I had ever really spoken to beyond a polite nod in the hallway. But right now, he was the difference between me making it out of this alive or not. Mark turned first, his body tensing, his mask slipping for the first time. The two men with him reacted next, shoulders tightening, glancing between each other like they weren't sure what to do now that they had been seen. Then, just like that, they scattered. Like cockroaches. Mark moved first, cursing under his breath as he shoved past my neighbor, disappearing down the hall. The stocky man was next, following right after him without hesitation. But the tall one, he lingered. His gaze flicked back to me, sharp, assessing, something unreadable behind those dark eyes. Then, with a slow, almost lazy smirk, he turned and walked out the door like none of this had ever happened. Like this had all just been a game. Like I had just been a game. And then, they were gone. I was shaking. Violently. I hadn't even realized I had dropped to the floor, my knees colliding with the carpet, my breaths coming too fast, too shallow. A warm hand touched my shoulder. "Hey, are you?" I flinched hard. The neighbor pulled back instantly, palms raised in surrender. "Whoa, hey, it's okay. You're safe now." Safe. Was I? Because I didn't feel safe. I felt nothing. Or maybe too much. My hands curled into fists, fingernails digging into my palms, trying to ground myself, trying to focus on something other than the way my skin still burned where Mark had touched me, where his fingers had pressed into my wrist, where I could still feel their eyes on me. I forced myself to breathe. In. Out. In. Out. I was okay. I was okay. I had to be okay. In that moment, I realized, sometimes, monsters aren't just in your head. They knock on your door, pretending to be kind. The apartment felt different now. The second they were gone, the air shifted, like the walls themselves had been holding their breath, waiting, just like I had. I wanted to believe it was over, that the worst part had passed. But the fear? It didn't leave. It sat there, curled inside me like something living, something growing, something that wouldn't let go. I still felt Mark's hand on my wrist. Still felt the weight of his words hanging in the air. "We'll figure something out." I almost had. I almost gave in. And the worst part? I didn't know if I would have fought if my neighbor hadn't shown up. "Hey." I flinched. Hard. The neighbor, Derek. That was his name. I remembered now, was crouching in front of me, his brows furrowed in concern. I had barely spoken since they left. Had barely moved. "You okay?" His voice was softer now, careful, like he was talking to someone who might break. I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to tell him I was never going to be okay again. But all I could do was nod. A lie, because I was still on the floor. Still shaking. Still trying to process what had almost happened. Derek exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face before pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the cops." My stomach twisted. Mark was gone. The other two were gone. The cops weren't going to do anything. But I didn't stop him. They showed up within the hour. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't doing anything to stop the shaking. The questions came fast. What happened? Did they hurt you? Do you know the other men? Did he ever threaten you before? I answered mechanically, my voice flat, detached. And then, the question I knew was coming. Did they do anything? My throat closed. I shook my head. Because no, technically, they hadn't. They hadn't touched me, hadn't forced anything. But what do you call it when someone locks the door behind them? When they corner you in your own home? When they talk to you like your choices aren't really yours to make? What do you call it when you know, that if the door hadn't burst open when it did, you wouldn't be sitting here answering these questions? I didn't have a word for it. So I just said no. And they nodded, scribbled something in their little notepads, and told me they'd look into it. I knew what that meant. Nothing would happen. Mark and his friends were long gone. No evidence, no proof, no crime committed. So that was it. That was the end. Except it wasn't. Because I was still here. And I didn't know how to stop being afraid. Derek stayed with me that night. I didn't ask him to. I didn't have to. I think he saw it in my face, the way I kept flinching at shadows, how I kept looking at the door like I expected it to fly open again. So he stayed. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Finally, he said, I heard them. I turned to him. Through the wall, he explained. I could hear them talking. And I could hear you. I swallowed hard. I almost didn't knock. His voice was quiet now, almost like he was ashamed. Didn't want to get involved. Thought maybe it was just, I don't know. He exhaled, shaking his head. But then I heard you say, I don't understand what's going on. And your voice. He trailed off. He didn't have to finish the sentence. I knew what he meant. I had sounded like a trapped animal. And that's exactly what I had been. The days that followed blurred together. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the knock again. Heard Mark's voice. Don't act like you don't know how this works. I checked the locks 5, 6, 7 times a night. I kept the curtains drawn, jumped at every footstep outside my door. I didn't feel safe in my own home. But I had nowhere else to go. The notice was still sitting on my counter. I was still behind on rent. And now I was even more alone than before. Because even if Mark never came back, there would always be another Mark. Another man who saw my desperation as an opportunity. Another man who thought I owed him something just because I was struggling. And that terrified me more than anything. I wasn't just late on rent. I was prey. And I never even saw it coming. The moment kept replaying in my head, over and over, like a movie reel stuck on the worst part. The knock. The way the air shifted when I opened the door. The slow, heavy click of the lock behind them. Mark's voice, so casual, so certain. Like he knew how this would end before I did. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if my neighbor hadn't come? What if the door had never burst open? Would I still be standing here? Would I still be me? Or would I be something else, someone hollowed out, someone broken? And the scariest thought of all? What if I had said yes? I hadn't fought. Not really. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't tried to run. I had stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. What did that say about me? That I had been this close to giving in? Not because I wanted to. Not because I thought it was okay. But because I didn't see another way out. Because I was tired. Because I had no money. Because my options were running out, and the truth was, I understood why women did it. Why some of them stopped fighting. Why some of them said yes. Because sometimes, yes is just another way of saying, I don't have a choice. And that thought, that unbearable, gut-wrenching thought, made me sick. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak, every footstep outside my door. I barely slept. And when I did, the nightmares came. Always the same. The knock. The door opening. Their voices circling me, the walls closing in, the lock clicking into place, and then I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, my hands clenched so tight my nails had left crescent-shaped marks in my palms. It never really left me. The fear, even when the apartment was silent. Even when I was alone. Because it wasn't over. Not really. I started questioning everything. Was it my fault for trusting Mark? Had I missed the signs? Had I been stupid for thinking he was just being nice? I kept going over the moments, the little things, how his smiles had lingered too long, how his words had always carried an unspoken meaning, how he had always acted like we had some kind of unspoken agreement. I should have seen it. I should have known. But I hadn't. And that was the part that haunted me the most. Because I like to think I was smarter than that. I like to think I would never let myself be taken advantage of. But the truth? The truth was, I hadn't seen it coming. And that terrified me. Even now, I keep wondering. What if things had played out differently? What if Mark had pushed harder? What if his friends had decided they didn't want to leave so easily? Would I have screamed? Would I have fought back? Or would I have just let it happen? Because that's what scared me the most. The idea that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have fought at all. I still wonder, what if I had nowhere else to go? What if I had said yes? I wish I could say this was just a bad night, just one of those things that happened, something I could shake off and forget. But I can't. Because even though Mark is gone, even though his so-called friends disappeared into the night like the cowards they are, the fear stayed. The questions stayed. The what-if stayed. And maybe that's the worst part. Not knowing what would have happened if things had gone just a little differently. not knowing if I would have made the right choice or if I would have made a choice at all. I keep asking myself, was I really lucky that night? Or did I just barely escape something I'll never fully understand? But now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt trapped? Where you knew something was wrong, but you didn't know how to fix it? Where you felt like no matter what choice you made, there was no real way out? If you have, I want to hear your story. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have fought back? Would you have run? Or would you have frozen, the way I did? Because I think, deep down, we all like to believe we'd make the right choice. We all like to believe we'd see the warning signs. But the truth is, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't realize you're the prey until the trap has already been set. So tell me, have you ever trusted the wrong person? Have you ever found yourself in a situation that made you question everything? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about it. And if you want to hear more real stories that uncover the hidden dangers of trust, make sure to subscribe. Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that actually happened. I used to think I understood how the world worked. I thought bad things only happened to people who made obvious mistakes. The ones who ignored clear red flags, the ones who should have known better. But now I know better. Because the truth is, danger doesn't always come with a warning sign. It doesn't always come in the form of a masked intruder or a shadowy stranger lurking in a dark alley. Sometimes it looks normal. Sometimes it looks friendly. Sometimes it looks like the man who smiles at you in the hallway. The one who seems understanding when you're struggling. The one who tells you, don't worry, we'll figure something out. But the moment you owe him, that's when the mask slips. That's when you realize, not every favor is free. And some debts you don't want to owe.